Welcome to my channel. Today, on the bench, is a pretty nice Omega in need of some attention. It's currently not running, and even winding it produces no response. The glass has some scratches but seem salvageable. The rest of the case is not that bad considering the age of this watch. Let's begin by aligning the hands for disassembly, and then let's flip the watch and open up the case back. On this side, no prominent scratches. Waterproof is engraved in the lower side, a statement that is very likely not true since quite some time for this watch. Here's the movement. At first glance, it seems decent, but a closer look reveals a faint film on the components, likely the result of condensation. This caliber is the Omega 471, introduced in 1954. It boasts 19 joules, an Incablock shock protection system, and a power reserve of approximately 46 hours. We'll start the disassembly by removing the automatic module. This movement, dating back to the 1950s, is about 65 to 70 years old. This is a primary reason why I like mechanical watches. If maintained properly, they can last centuries. I'm sure we can make this one back into great shape. Here is the last screw maintaining the module in place. I always use a plastic rod with flat tip to dislodge bridges. The goal is not to make any scratches. The automatic assembly will be disassembled, cleaned, and lubricated separately later. Next, we'll take out the two clamps securing the movement inside the case. Now let's detach the crown and its stem. With those out of the way, the movement is gently lifted from the case. The dial is a standout feature of this watch. Let's inspect it under the microscope. The dial has a texture referred as honeycomb, and the radioactive luminous plots on the indices and hands have aged into a nice orange patina. We'll carefully remove the hands using levers, placing a protective plastic sheet over the dial to prevent any damage. The gold-plated hands are out of the way. Let's store them securely. After that, I'll unscrew the tiny screws securing the dial feet to the movement plate. The movement spacer was still there. It is now out of the way. Now, the dial is gently lifted off, revealing the dial side of the movement. The hour wheel comes off next, and we'll take a moment to examine the back of the dial. The soldered feet are intact with no visible issues on that area. Let's quickly put some order in the workplace. Here we go. It is now much better organized. Always have a clean work environment. The disassembled parts are now stored safely. Using a Presto tool, I removed the cannon pinion, a crucial component of the motion works. This piece, friction fitted to the center wheel, translates gear movement into the time display and drives the minute hand. Moving deeper into the disassembly, it's time to address the balance wheel, the heart of the regulating system. We are now in the gist of the disassembly. The process is often the same. Different watchmakers have provided different solutions to same problems in watchmaking. For instance, the automatic module is often specific to each family of movements in a brand. However, the skeleton of a mechanical watch has been the same since the 17th century. Here, I discover a potential cause for the watch's failure. The lower pivot is almost seized in the jewel hole, likely from dried lubricant. After carefully freeing it, the balance is placed on a holder for later inspection. Next, we release the power from the mainspring by carefully unwinding it. Letting down the mainspring ensures safety and protects both the movement and the watchmaker. A wound mainspring stores a significant amount of energy. If the movement is disassembled while it is under tension, parts like gears and pivots can be suddenly and forcefully displaced, leading to damage or breakage. The sudden release of energy can cause small parts to spring out of place. We talked about different solutions to same problems earlier on. Here is a case in point. We have here the usual crown wheel, part of the hand winding mechanism. It is connected to the winding stem and engaged with the ratchet wheel to transmit motion from the crown to the mainspring barrel when winding manually. On this movement, there is an additional wheel mounted above the ratchet wheel that interacts with the automatic winding system. This secondary wheel allows the energy generated by the oscillating rotor to be transmitted to the ratchet wheel, thereby winding the mainspring automatically. Older watches often suffer wear around the mainspring barrel hole, causing excess play and reducing amplitude. Under magnification, the barrel arbor shows noticeable play, which we'll address later. Whilst removing some more screws and bridges, we can notice that the surface finish is of high quality. All screws are highly mirror polished. The bridges are nicely finished with the copper gilt plating known to this era of Omega movements. The edges of the bridges are also nicely angled. This tiny component here is the seconds hand pinion, supported by a spring beneath it to ensure smooth operation. Now, removing the barrel bridge. The click and click spring will also be disassembled, cleaned, and lubricated later on. I do not show every single step of the servicing, simply for the sake of reducing the potential clutter and having smooth video result. It would simply be too much and too long to show absolutely everything. This isn't a full course, but more of a glimpse into watchmaking. This Cal.470, developed by Mark Favre, was a successor to Omega's bumper automatics. Its success paved the way for the renowned 550 series, marking an important evolution in Omega's self-winding technology. After removing the final bridge, we can put our detective hat back on and pursue the small investigation to find why the watch isn't in working condition. Another clue is added to the list. One of the wheel is stuck and comes with the bridge. In addition to the balance wheel, hard to remove from its jewel hole, this further confirms the fact that the oil has dried up in multiple spots in the movement, making the free movement of the train of wheel impossible. The back side of the plate is almost completely disassembled. Let's remove the pallet fork cock. Like always, being careful not to break the tiny pinions of the pallet fork. In watchmaking, the cock and the bridge are both structural components that support the movement's gears and other mechanisms. However, they slightly differ, hence different designations. A cock is a small single-ended support piece that is secured to the movement at only one end. A bridge is a larger, multi-pointed support piece that spans across the movement and is secured at multiple points. On the dial side, the center wheel is slightly jammed and requires a gentle nudge to free it. Interestingly, someone engraved a service date on the plate during a past repair, a practice I'm not particularly fond of since it leaves a permanent mark. Anyhow, the keyless work is gradually getting disassembled. When handling springs, I always block them to prevent them from flying off into the abyss of the workspace. With the dial side nearly cleared, only the winding and sliding pinions remain. Before continuing, it's time to tidy up the workbench once more. Let's address the play issue of the barrel arbor. For this, I am going to use a staking tool with 2 rounded punches. I am gently tapping the punch with a small hammer, while turning the bridge, ensuring that the hole is reduced evenly. What is basically done here is shown in a side view animation I made. The bridge is in yellow and is placed in between the 2 punches in red. The matter of the bridge is slowly pushed inward using a hammer, creating a smaller hole. After that, the hole should be smaller than the barrel arbor. It is purposefully made so that it doesn't fit. Then comes the smoothing broach. This tool will flatten the ends. This is why the hole was made smaller earlier on. A flattened surface will be much more optimal for the contact between the barrel arbor and the bridge. Finally comes the inspection of the work done. Let's check the results. Before, noticeable play in the barrel arbor. After, no play and the barrel rotates freely. It's crucial that it's not too tight to maintain a smooth operation. With that issue resolved, I open the barrel to remove the mainspring. Here is the lid and the arbor. Now let's take the mainspring out. I take the inside end piece with my tweezer while blocking the outer area so that the spring doesn't fly out. This is the strongest spring in the movement, so always be mindful of it when taking it out of the barrel drum. This part is quite filthy, old, dried up grease everywhere. The next step involves taking apart the shock system jewels. This watch features the Inca block system, one of the most widely used designs in watchmaking. Developed in the 1930s, the Inca block system became an industry standard by the 1950s. Its iconic lyre-shaped spring protects the delicate pivots of the balance wheel from impact damage, an essential feature for watches that endure everyday wear and tear. These will also need to be cleaned and properly lubricated later. Now that the cleaning is complete and the parts have been thoroughly inspected, it's time to move on to reassembly and oiling. We start with the 2 cap jewels for the balance wheel. A low viscosity oil is applied, just enough to cover between half and 2/3 of the jewel surface. Once that's done, the end stone is reassembled and carefully placed back into its block. The same process is repeated on the other side of the balance staff. Next, we turn our attention to the barrel. After a deep clean, it's ready for the next step. Since this is an automatic movement, I'm using a braking grease. A thin layer of this thick, dark grease is applied to the inner wall of the barrel. Its high viscosity makes it ideal for this purpose. With the barrel prepped, a brand new mainspring is fitted inside. I always begin with the outermost end of the spring so that the rest naturally follows. The braking grease creates a controlled amount of friction against the mainspring, ensuring a more uniform release of energy. The grease helps maintain consistent torque to the gear train, which is essential for accurate timekeeping. The barrel lid is then snapped into place using a small plastic tool, which applies even pressure from all sides. Now onto the train of wheels. Each wheel is gently seated into its jewel holes, ensuring the pinions align perfectly. The bridge is then placed and secured, locking everything into position. The barrel is also repositioned, completing this phase. This movement features an interesting design detail. The third wheel serves a dual purpose. It functions as a classic third wheel but is also coaxial to another gear that drives the second's hand pinion. It is reminiscent of the ratchet wheel mentioned earlier with its two coaxial gears. This specific movement belongs to the golden age of vintage Omega watches. It hails from a lineage that began with the 200 series, particularly the manually wound 260s and 280s used in the 36mm jumbo models. Later came a first attempt at a self-winding movement, which is the bumper calibers in the 300 series, followed by the refined full-rotor automatic modules of the 400 series. The pinnacle of this evolution can be seen in the 500 series and its manual counterparts in the 600 series. These movements are most famously found in the Seamaster and Constellation lines, but also appear in lesser-known, non-designated models, like this one, as well as in the Genève line in later years. Now, let's shift to the dial side. The winding and sliding pinions are lubricated and installed back onto the plate. Next comes the stem and its crown, also lubricated. These components are part of what's called the keyless works. The term dates back to an era when pocket watches were wound with a key, which was also used to set the time. The 1800s was the era that seen the birth of keyless mechanisms. British, Swiss, and French watchmakers invented a mechanism that allowed a single crown to handle both winding and time setting. The cleverness lies in the clutch wheel, which slides back and forth on the winding stem. The stem is squared off at the portion where the clutch wheel moves, ensuring the wheel turns in sync with the stem. In one position, with the crown pushed in, turning it winds the mainspring. In the other position, with the crown pulled out, it drives a series of intermediate wheels that ultimately connects the minute wheel and the hour wheel. The cannon pinion, just like a sleeve, fits onto the center wheel's shaft and is held in place by friction. It directly drives the minute hand, while the hour wheel, placed on top, controls the hour hand. With most of the assembly complete, the pallet fork and its cock are installed and secured. Then comes the moment of truth. The balance wheel is placed, and just like that, the movement springs to life. It's ticking again. The culprit was indeed the dried up oils in different spots of the movement. After finishing the oiling and letting the movement run for a day, let's get to regulation. Here are the numbers right off the bat. Amplitude is pretty good. The rate and beat error need adjusting. Let's start with the beat error, which is the difference in duration between the clockwise and counterclockwise swings of the balance wheel. In an ideal scenario, the beat error should be 0 and at least under 1 millisecond in all positions. Some movements have an easy adjustment for this on the balance cock, but in this case, it must be done directly on the collet of the balance wheel. Basically, the collet here, represented in white, is slightly rotated on its axis. By slightly rotating the collet, we can fine-tune the position of the balance spring. After some back and forth, the numbers are looking much better. I typically regulate movements in 4 positions: dial up, dial down, crown up, and crown down. The delta is the difference between the two most farther numbers of the mean rate. Here it is minus 3.25 and plus 7.25. The delta should be below 15. The rest is also pretty good. We're now in the final stretch. The hour wheel is installed, along with a small part that was initially missing, a dial washer. This ensures the hour wheel stays engaged with the intermediate wheels once the dial is fitted. The hands are next. The hour hand is pressed into place, followed by the minute hand, which is carefully aligned under a microscope to ensure precision. Finally, the second hand is added. The movement is cased, and the crystal has been polished to remove the light scratches. The automatic module is fitted back on. I have also placed the case components in an anti-rust solution and cleaned it in an ultrasonic bath. The old gasket has dried up and is now very brittle. I fitted the case back with a fresh gasket. The work is almost done. The case back is pressed back on. And here it is. It is looking much better, and look at that dial. Thank you for being with me on this first video. I have a lot more of these videos to come. I will be pleased to have you back on the channel anytime. See you soon for the next one.